There is a comic where Darth Vader fights Darth Maul, and it's amazing. So this comic takes place before the events of Episode 4, when Darth Vader's on the hunt for the battle plans for the first Death Star, which were stolen by the Rebel Alliance. And the idea is that this is seemingly the place where the Rebel Alliance is hanging out at least that's the information he had been given. Now, of course, we know that's not the case, but he sends the Stormtroopers out to do what Stormtroopers do, which is usually just get shot up, destroyed, or miss their target every time they pull the trigger. But somebody out there is literally going through and just killing every single Stormtrooper they come across. Now, what's crazy about this is Darth Vader figures out incredibly fast that the Rebel Alliance is not here. But instead of simply just leaving, he actually just kind of explores the place for a moment. And in fact, he opens the temple using the power of the Force, right? Like one of the Stormtroopers is like, do you want us to blow the doors open? And Darth Vader's like, nope. That won't be necessary. I got force power, son, and opens the door up, right? Now, as he makes his way through there, these Stormtroopers kind of provide a little bit of context to this place, because Darth Vader makes the statement that this place is very strong with the dark side, and that's when he kind of realizes the Rebel Alliance isn't here. But one of the Stormtroopers makes this statement in saying if the Rebels are here, they could not have picked a spookier place. And when one of the guys starts talking about the history of it, he says 100 years ago, an aristocrat named Baron Yorn left Coruscant and came here with some followers. They believed the moon was a focal point for the dark side of the Force, so they built this fortress with the intention of conducting experiments to explore the dark side. But something happened. When the supply ship returned, all of them had vanished except for Yorn, who'd gone mad and tore out his eyes and his own tongue. So it's like a really twisted place. Now, as an aside, in Star Wars, there's all kinds of planets and locations out there that are very strong in the light and the dark side of the Force. We've learned that over the course of the entirety of the expanded universe when it existed. But what ends up happening with one of these Stormtroopers is they literally get force choked. And he kind of makes this statement and saying, like, we apologize, like, it was just idle talk, please don't kill me. But that's when Vader's like, this is not my doing. I'm not the one who's killing you guys. So he breaks out his lightsaber and says, like, show yourself. And that's when these three beings kind of come out of nowhere. And what they do is they call him into question, right? You've been measured, you've been tested, and you've been found wanting. The idea here is that they want to kill off Darth Vader, and they want to replace him with Darth Maul as the proper apprentice of Darth Sidious. Now, here's the thing to understand about Darth Maul. If you go and you read his comics, of course, Vader, you could argue, is more powerful than Darth Maul. Anakin in his normal human form certainly was, right? That's without question. But the kicker here is that there is a school of thought out there that Darth Maul was a better apprentice for Darth Sidious than Anakin Skywalker was. Because unlike Anakin Skywalker, who fell to the dark side more out of a desire to save Padme, Darth Maul was just pure hatred incarnate, right? This guy was like people on Twitter. He was mad about everything. So it's just one of those crazy things where people are like, it was a mistake to have Vader become the new apprentice for Sidious instead of Darth Maul. Now, not everybody believes that, and I imagine the number of people who do is very, very small. But this group here looks at him and says, you're more machine than man. You're not actually a person who's fit to be an apprentice for Darth Sidious. Darth Maul should be that guy instead. Now, Darth Vader takes this as a personal affront, and he tells them, like, you bring doom upon yourselves, right? That's going to be important here in a little while. I want you to keep that in the back of your heads. But when he goes to attack them, Darth Maul steps in. Now, it totally blows Darth Vader away. He never saw this coming, right? He's like, Darth Maul, like, you should be dead. Now, one of the things to know, and this is kind of where you get into murky territory, does Darth Vader really remember things with Darth Maul? Even when he's entering into the temple itself, he talks about how he senses a presence that's familiar, but it's not really the same way as it was with like Obi-Wan Kenobi. Because in A New Hope, he says, like, I sense a presence that I haven't felt in a long time. So there's no real indication that he remembers everything with Darth Maul, which kind of makes sense because he was so young. And Darth Maul was killed long before Anakin became a proper apprentice, or really a proper Padawan, to Obi-Wan Kenobi. But the fight between the two, this is what I'm curious about, man. I want to know how you guys think this fight would have gone, right? Like, in reality, outside of this comic, who do you think would have actually won? Now, Darth Vader asked the question, how have you done this, right? They don't give him an answer, but what he does say is like, Darth Maul was slain years ago, so there's no possible way he can be alive here. And the only thing they really do is they say, there are ways to create an individual, to mold an individual in every way. If the hate is strong enough, we took it upon ourselves to resurrect a proper apprentice for the master rather than tolerate one who is tainted. But we're not really given a proper explanation in terms of how they do it. Honestly, we could simply just say it's Sith alchemy. It's one of the cool things about the entirety of the Sith history that in a lot of ways, Disney doesn't really explore too much, because you can do some crazy stuff with the Force if you know what you're doing, right? You can just do bonkers things, resurrecting people from the dead and so on and so forth, more than just like some dubious statement made by Sidious to Anakin Skywalker in order to convince him to fall to the dark side. I mean, like, legit resurrecting people from the dead. It's nuts. But the whole idea here is they want the two of them to fight to the death. Now, initially, Darth Vader intends to walk away, but what they say is Darth Maul will prove himself by slaying you. The Emperor will be pleased. Of course, you could refuse the duel and attempt to destroy all of us here and now. You might even succeed, but such a deed would diminish you in the Emperor's eyes, would it not? And you would always wonder, doubt would always nag at you. You could never be certain whether Darth Maul was your better unless you take up this challenge. So let's see what you have to offer. And the fight between the two is cool because honestly, they're right. Even though Palpatine has somewhat of a role in this, and we'll actually find out more as we get towards the end of this story, if Darth Vader had refused the duel and Palpatine had learned that this duel could have happened, Palpatine probably would have started plotting to replace Darth Vader. Because remember, when it comes to the rule of the Sith, that the goal of the apprentice is to basically become strong enough and kill the master. But by passing up an opportunity to even potentially even expand their skills, it would show the Emperor that Darth Vader is falling short of his role as a Sith. And so he fights Darth Maul. Now, the fight between the two is awesome because Darth Maul talks like the most trash ever, right? Like, you are a sham, you're a Jedi, I can see it in you. A lone light in the darkness that you refuse to extinguish. You're nothing like me. My darkness, my hatred is unending, right? And so like Darth Vader tries to counter as best he can in terms of like talking trash. But let's be honest, man, Darth Vader's good at being intimidating. But if you read the Star Wars comics, Darth Maul, dude, this guy's ability to trash talk is like his #1 power. Forget his ability to like duel with a lightsaber and his command over the Force, man. His trash talk is on a whole nother level. And so one of the things that happens here is that as they're dueling back and forth, Darth Vader says, I don't need help to destroy an imposter. And the response of Darth Maul is, it's you who wears the mask, you who hides his unworthiness. Tell me, which of us is truly an imposter? Now, one of the cool things that Darth Maul picks up on here is there is that small glint of light that's inside Darth Vader. We know that from the Darth Vader solo series, where he actually goes to visit the burial, right? Like the tomb of Padme. So he hasn't quite let that go. We know that from like the Return of the Jedi, when he turns back to the light side. There's just that little part of him that hasn't completely fallen. He's like the Keldromas, right? Falling to the dark side, going back to the light side, repenting for his actions, that kind of thing. And so one of the things that happens is in this fight between the two of them, Darth Vader's able to hold his own. Now, this is the reason why I say there's no way that Darth Maul would have stood a chance against Anakin Skywalker in like Star Wars Episode 3. He would have sliced this guy to ribbons and been home in time for cornflakes. But with Darth Vader, it's a little bit different because sure, it's still Anakin Skywalker, but he's slower than he was before. He's not as agile as he was before. But I would argue his command over the Force is greater than it was before. The potential was always there, but in lieu of being able to be as agile as he was, he had to compensate for it. Focusing more on his ability to manipulate the Force, that's really where Darth Vader's strength shows itself. So even when you have Darth Maul, who's bouncing around and dancing around and so on and so forth, even while he's talking trash and saying like, surprising Jedi, you stand your ground against me, I wonder, are you as confident when you can't depend upon the ground beneath you? And he takes out the entirety of the ground under Vader. Vader's still able to bounce back. He's still able to recover from that fall. Now, some of that's also because he's just a giant lug of a machine, right? But still, the response of Maul is, did you learn nothing from the master? Never break a fall. If you are prepared to break your fall, you are prepared for the fall itself. And then he says, Sith, do not fall. There is no pain where strength lies. And the only real response that Vader gives is, someone taught you your lessons well, not as well as I learned mine. And so that's where you start to see how Vader shines and is more capable than Darth Maul. Darth Maul had command over the Force, and he can do some cool stuff with the Force. But I would argue Darth Maul's command and his use of the Force is nowhere near what Vader's is. When you're fighting Darth Vader, you're not just fighting a Sith Lord with a lightsaber, you're fighting your entire environment. Everything becomes a weapon. Everything becomes something that can kill you. And so the only counter that Darth Maul gives here is he's effectively running away is, follow me if you can. And of course, Vader follows him. Now, these guys who are watching this battle come to realize they're a lot more evenly matched, right? Vader and Maul are a lot more evenly matched than they expected them to be. There's still the belief that Darth Maul will be victorious, that he's an engine of pure hate, but that Darth Vader, there's too much of the light side in him. But one of the things they seem to fail to realize here, Darth Vader was born of the Force. So that's one of the reasons why you see a lot of fans in the Star Wars mythos who look at Anakin Skywalker and argue, had he never fallen to the dark side, had he stayed Anakin Skywalker and potentially even stayed on the light path, right? Meaning that he actually joined Mace Windu and killed Emperor Palpatine, assuming he didn't like run off with Padme and abandon the Jedi or whatever, he'd be the most powerful Jedi to ever exist in the history of Star Wars. Some would argue he already was, right? It just kind of depends on who you're talking to. But the fact remains here that Darth Vader, being as capable as he is being painfully overlooked. And that's kind of the big failure of the Sith in a lot of ways. Sure, they're cooler than the Jedi. They always have been and they always will be. And do not listen to anyone who tells you otherwise. The Sith are definitely cooler than the Jedi. But in a lot of ways, while they chastise the Jedi for being so hyper-focused on meditation and just kind of sitting around in their citadel, you know, smoking hashish and talking about like what they should do and meditating on the Force and whatnot, the Sith aren't really all that different. They focus so much on rage. They focus so much on passion, because where the Jedi see peace and kind of a personal attunement with the Force as their source of power, and the Sith see emotions as their source of power, they're not that different when it comes to those two groups, right? The only real differentiation between whether the Sith or the Jedi come out on top is how well one side's able to trick the other. And so Darth Maul literally says, like, now we'll finish this. And the response of Vader is, yes, we will finish this. And so the response of Maul here, he says, how can you be a fit servant for the master? You're more machine than man. How can a machine hate? And that's what I'm talking about here. So much emphasis being put on emotion. There's so little understanding of how you can actually blend the light side and the dark side, becoming something akin to a gray Jedi and come out on top. Of course, Darth Vader's not a gray Jedi. The dude's a straight up Sith Lord. But the fact remains here that like facing off against someone like Vader, being hyper-focused on the fact that he's more machine than man, and seeing that as a weakness is overlooking the inherent nature of Darth Vader, a being born of the Force, fighting the very nature of the Force itself. And so even in this instance, when he says, how will you defeat me? I slew Obi-Wan Kenobi's master, the response of Vader is, and Obi-Wan Kenobi killed you, right? So the transitive property here, there's no way you're stronger than me. That kind of thing, because he killed Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? So the battle between them is like just to the death, and it's hardcore. Now, initially he gets the upper hand, right? Maul gets the upper hand on Vader, slashes his helmet and says, now your master will have an apprentice worthy of the Sith. But what he ends up doing here is actually not paying attention to what's going on around him, because he says, no Jedi pyre for you, Skywalker. Your hate was not nearly enough. And where he basically knocks the lightsaber out of his hands, Darth Vader does the one thing that Darth Maul would never have done. He intentionally injures himself to injure his opponent. He recalls his lightsaber back to him and then activates it, stabs through himself, and then stabs through Darth Maul. Like literally, Darth Maul is like, what? What could you hate enough in order to destroy me? And the response of Vader, myself. I hate myself more than anything else. Now that's one of the most important things to understand about Darth Vader's character. It's been true ever since his character was introduced in Star Wars itself. If there's any one person that Darth Vader hates the most, it is himself. He despises himself because of how easily he was tempted to the dark side. In hindsight, how silly it was to believe that a being out there, right, a guy, Lord Sidious, whose entire group, the Sith, are known for being duplicitous, known for being liars, right, manipulators, that he would believe him when he says, we can find a way to save Padme. How could someone be so foolish? But being so caught up in emotion, being so swept up in the fact that it was possible, not even sitting down and considering the fact whether it could actually be done, ultimately got the better of him. And he's hated himself ever since, because Darth Vader, you could argue, is single-handedly responsible for the collapse of the Republic. And so it's a really cool revelation here, because Darth Vader comes out on top and Darth Vader killed Darth Maul. And so what you end up having is him showing up to these guys and saying, you bring this doom upon yourselves, only for them to be destroyed by Emperor Palpatine using Force lightning. And he says, I see you have survived, apprentice. Good. Now, one of the coolest things about Sidious when it comes to like the comics and even in like the movies and the TV shows, it's very, very mysterious in terms of what he does. Did he have a hand in this or did he not? Right? That he asks him like, how did you come to be here? And his response is, my shuttle followed yours, Lord Vader. I'd hoped you would be retrieving those stolen plans by the rebels. Am I to assume the plans are not here, right? He's like, nope, it was all a deception that was perpetrated by those that you just slew, a deception designed to draw me to this place. And where Vader says they had recreated Darth Maul, I don't know how, the response of Sidious is, there are ways that those who are no more can live again. They were heretics, these three. Apparently they believed they could provide me with a superior apprentice, yet you are victorious. And so when Vader asks him, was any of this known to you, what these acolytes were attempting, his response is no. But it's Darth Sidious, so there's no reason to believe that this wasn't all a giant ruse by him to test Darth Vader, and that if Vader failed, that Maul would return as his apprentice. There's no definitive answer there, right? But I want to know what you guys think. Do you guys think that Darth Vader in his current form would actually defeat Darth Maul, or do you think that Darth Maul would have killed Vader here? With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.